On January 13th, 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 crashed into the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., just 2 miles from the White House. The bridge carries Interstate 395 between Washington and Arlington County in Virginia. The plane hit 7 occupied vehicles and destroyed 97 feet, or 30 meters, of guardrail before plunging into the icy river below. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, was en route from Washington National Airport to Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in Florida. On board were 74 passengers and 5 crew members. On the morning of the disaster, Washington National Airport was closed due to a heavy snowstorm that deposited 6.5 inches, 16.5 centimeters, of snow. Once the airport reopened at noon, the flight's scheduled departure time was delayed almost 2 hours due to the backlog of departure and arrivals. As the plane readied for departure, a moderate snowfall continued with the air temperature at 24 degrees Fahrenheit or -4 Celsius. The plane itself had trouble leaving the gate. Conditions were so bad that it took a ground services tow equipped with snow chains to maneuver it to taxiing position. After eventually leaving the gate, the plane waited in a taxi line behind other planes for a further 49 minutes before reaching the takeoff runway. The pilot decided not to return to the gate for further de-icing of the plane, for fear of further delay in takeoff. More snow and ice accumulated on the wings during this period, and the crew was aware of this fact when they decided to take off. Heavy snow was falling during their takeoff roll at 3:59 p.m. Although it was snowing and temperature was well below freezing, the crew did not activate the engine's anti-ice system. This uses heat from the engines to prevent sensors from freezing, ensuring accurate readings in the cockpit. Neither pilot had much experience flying in snowy, cold weather. The captain had made only 8 takeoffs or landings in such conditions, and the first officer had only flown in snow once. The pilots made another questionable decision when they decided to maneuver closely behind a DC-9 taxiing just ahead of them. Their belief was that heat from the DC-9's engines would melt the snow and ice that had accumulated on Flight 90's wings. This was against flight manual recommendations for an icing situation. In fact, this caused more snow and ice to accumulate during takeoff. Instead of falling off the plane, the snow and ice refroze on the wing's leading edges. As the takeoff roll began, the first officer noted several times to the captain that the instrument panel readings were seemingly inaccurate. The plane did not appear to have developed the necessary power needed for takeoff, despite the panel readings saying otherwise. The captain dismissed these concerns and proceeded to take off. The accumulation of ice on the plane's wings adversely affected the plane's lift, and it traveled almost half a mile, 800 meters, further down the runway than is customary, before finally taking off. Survivors of the crash later indicated that the trip over the runway was extremely rough, with one believing the plane would not get airborne and would fall off the runway. Once Flight 90 finally became airborne, it attained a maximum altitude of only 352 feet, 107 meters, before it began losing altitude, staying airborne for only 30 seconds. At 4:01, the plane crashed into the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River, just 0.75 nautical miles, 1,390 meters, from the end of the runway. The plane hit 6 cars and a truck on the bridge, before plunging into the icy river. All but the tail section quickly became submerged. A total of 6 passengers and crew survived the impact, and were clinging onto the tail section awaiting rescue. Rescue attempts were hampered by gridlocked traffic on the bridge and the icy conditions. Around 4:20, a United States Park Police helicopter arrived on the scene and began attempting to airlift the survivors. Passenger Arlen J. Williams, Jr. was unable to unstrap himself from the wreckage. He continued to pass a line on to as many of his co-survivors as possible so they could be towed to shore. When the helicopter returned for Williams, the wreckage he was strapped into had rolled over and submerged. He was the only initial survivor to drown. The 737 had broken into several large pieces upon impact. Although the impact speed was deemed survivable by investigators, the breakup of the fuselage and the icy water proved fatal for all persons aboard the plane, except for those seated in the tail section. Of the 79 passengers and crew aboard, only 5 people survived. In addition, 4 people traveling on the 14th Street Bridge when the plane hit died from their injuries. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the probable cause included the flight crew's failure to properly de-ice the plane. The engine's anti-ice heaters were not engaged during ground operation and takeoff. The decision to take off without de-icing and the failure to eject takeoff in the face of incorrect panel readings were also a major contributing factor. Partial blame was placed on the young, inexperienced flight crew. The pilots had begun their careers as commercial pilots less than 5 years earlier. Air Florida was known for hiring youthful pilots that worked for less money than veterans, and were there mainly to gain experience before moving on to bigger airlines. The airline filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2.5 years after the crash.